Just going to start with a few housekeeping items and introduction. Good afternoon from Burlington, Ontario, and good morning from our presenters. We are representing different parts of the country today. And just before we start, I have a few housekeeping items for us. First of all, the webinar is being recorded, so if you know of someone who wasn't able to be here today and you would like to share the excitement of what was presented with them, the recording will be available the week or so following the webinar, and you're welcome to pass that along. Following today's webinar, you will be directed to a screen with some feedback polls, and we do just invite your input on how this technology supported this sharing opportunity today, and your own feedback as to what you heard and what you might do following the webinar. The webinar will be 1 hour, and we do want this to be an interactive time of sharing the excitement of the Greenbelt experience, a time of being accountable to the broader church for that experience, and for those who might be with us that were actually at the Greenbelt event, perhaps a time of reconnecting with one another. We recognize there are technological limitations to doing something on this kind of a medium, not being in the same room together. So to compensate, we are experimenting with a format today that has a little bit of structure as well as opportunity for questions from you and interaction with one another. So there will be 2 questions around which today's presentation will be based. We will hear a 3-minute response to each question from each of our presenters, and then following that, there will be 2 periods of time to take questions from you and for presenters to interact more informally with one another. So we do invite you to type your questions into the chat pod as you think of them, and then we will do our best to respond to as many as possible. If you feel it's appropriate, we also ask that you would mark the question for a particular presenter. So if you have something in mind for one of the people with us today, if you could mark that in your question as well, that will help us to stay organized. Finally, if you do find the chatting distracting, and we know that is sometimes the case, feel free to ignore that. You can also make our lovely videos fit the full screen if you would like to do that and sort of block out the rest of the busyness on the screen. To do that, you can see at the top right of the video pod a little icon with some arrows, and if you click that, you will make that full screen. That does not affect the experience for any of the other participants, but will allow you to engage the webinar that way. So before I introduce our presenters, we're going to start with a short video to help set the mood, to give you a feeling of what the Greenbelt experience was like, and following that, I will introduce those who are with us today. So I'm going to just remind our presenters to mute their mics if they can while the video is playing.
Praise the Lord your God with all your heart. Every tongue and every ring. Every tongue and every ring. All of God's children. All of God's children. Sing praises.
The adventure begins. Life begins. The Greenbelt Festival, Cheltenham Racecourse, Gloucestershire, England, where arts, faith, and justice collide. In August 2013, supported by EDGE, the United Church of Canada Foundation, several conferences, and The Observer, 50 United Church ministry leaders aged 40 and younger, and 50 ministry leaders aged 40 and up, joined moderator Gary Patterson on a pilgrimage along with 20,000 other youth, adults, families, and faith leaders from around the world, and you saw some of that in the video presentation. In workshops, they participated in workshops, innovative worship opportunities, speakers, performances, and activities, all that embodied the robust renewal that God is raising up in this time. So today, while we regret not being able to hear from more of our pilgrims, we are fortunate to have 4 people with us who will share from their experience. So Gary Patterson is our closet poet, passionate preacher, teacher, and pastor, currently moderator of the United Church, and was the instigator for the Greenbelt experience. This morning, Gary joins us from Burnaby, BC, and the conference office. We're grateful to them for hosting him today. Sarah Chapman, who will be with us in a moment, is an ordained minister, coordinator with the Go Project, and is passionate about God's mission within and beyond the church's traditional structures. This morning, Sarah will join us from Toronto. Mitchell is a candidate for ordination who is concurrently pursuing his Master of Divinity and his Master of Business Administration simultaneously, as well as, I know, being involved in multiple other ministries. This morning, Mitchell joins us from Saskatoon. And finally, Barry King has been on the edge of change and transformational ministry for the past 30 years. He is passionate about social justice, preaching, and progressive Christianity. This morning, Barry joins us from Oakville. So although our 4 guests this morning did not necessarily have an opportunity to get to know one another at the Greenbelt event itself, they have, over the last while, had a chance to connect as they've prepared today's webinar, and we're grateful for the opportunity that they're giving for us to learn from them today. So with that, I am going to turn things over and introduce our first question, which centers around what did you learn? What was the highlight? How is that feeding your passion? So really, what was most meaningful in the experience for you? We will hear first from Barry, then Sarah, then Mitchell,
that's
and
the way I
then
open
Gary
up
in that
after seeing
order.
that video. It just it stimulates life in me like no other way. The Greenbelt experience for me was this profoundly transformative time in a very personal, vocational, and spiritual way. And it became this kind of oasis, a place of very deep refreshment for my own journey as a minister of the United Church of Canada, in a place and a time that we find ourselves in the life of the church, a Christian church, where we are discovering that we must be transformed in all kinds of new and exciting ways. It confirms, in fact, what I had believed over the last 10 years, that the future of the church and what it will look like, and that we will experience it probably radically different in years to come than we could imagine. And the evidence of that for me was expressed as I gathered with over, and the rest of us did, with over 20,000 others for what I call a festival of faith like nothing else that I have ever experienced in my entire life. It was a mind-blowing spiritual experience. People of every age and stage of life. I mean, there were Christians, there were Jews, there were Muslims, there were Mennonites, there were Buddhists I met, agnostics, atheists, who were there in community for a few days to worship, to pray, to converse, to listen, to dance, to paint, gathering in hope of learning and wanting to see a better world and to create a more just world for all of us. I spent time when I was there intentionally trying to speak with at least over 20 people who were under the age of 35, wanting to hear from them why they were there. Was it their first time? What was their faith background? Why are they there? Are they a part of a church or are they not? And the overwhelming response, and this is what I think is important for all of us to hear, is a word they used very frequently when they would answer my questions. And they said they were there looking for authenticity as a community that really walks its talk, of faith in every way, in wanting to change the world. And they were wanting to be in community, on the ground, immersed in the living of the gospel message in very different and radical ways, and embracing the true message of the person that we as Christians identify with, which is Jesus. For me, Greenbelt was church at its best. And what I can tell you is it saved my life quite literally as a minister. It gave me a great deal of hope and excitement and enthusiasm for all of us in the United Church of Canada. And I'm still looking forward to being part of a transformative, evolving, great life that we can have in what I call the emerging. So there you have it.
Thanks, Terry. Well, Sarah's having a few technical difficulties. I think I'll jump in. Hopefully she sorts the things out there in Toronto. So my name's Mitchell, and I was one of the under 40 folks who went to Greenbelt, and I went from Saskatoon. And some of the things I took away from it, so I took a lot away personally in terms of the future of what different kinds of ways of doing church will look like. And I think one of the big questions for me going in was, is there a point to denominations? Is there something important about an identity as the United Church? Because, we were going to, not a formally ecumenical gathering, but a gathering where there was all kinds of Christians and people of other faiths and of no faith gathered together, a kind of community that felt to them and felt to me to be truly authentic. But what I found when there was the 114 or so of us United Churchers who were there was that it was a real chance for us to wrestle and talk and explore together what the church across the world is going through, and to think about what that meant for us. And that it affirmed for me that there is a purpose and a place and a need for there to continue to be a United Church of Canada, not just gatherings of little pockets here and there, but something that binds us together. And I wrote at one point that, too often the expressions of the United Church at its national level is, an event, a general council here or a rendezvous there. But what Greenbelt affirmed for me was that what really makes the national church work is the relationships that are built between people, between individuals and between communities, and that if this United Church as a project is something we want to continue, then it's, there's Sarah, if the United Church is something that we want to continue and to build and foster, that it needs to be built and fostered through relationships, built on webinars and events, and built in many other ways. And that as we continue to build those relationships, then we're building something really meaningful. And I think that supportive relationships between people across Canada will allow us to do the kinds of innovative and transformative things that Greenbelt pointed us towards. And so now that Sarah's back, I think I'll let her jump in now, and we'll get back to our usual order.
Sorry about that. Our whole church internet just sort of shut down there. So it's good to be here with you. So I was a person who went representing one of the under 40 people in leadership within the United Church. And this might have been listed up already, but I want to just begin by naming that one of the greatest highlights for me was simply gathering with other young leaders from the United Church. And it was really a powerful experience to remove ourselves from our own context and have this really sacred time in a more informal space in a lot of ways. I think we spent a lot of time with our colleagues in very formal settings, either meetings or conferences where we kind of are all at the same thing. What I liked about this was I was able to have sort of more informal sharing with people who are also in ministry with me, and that was something really important to me. Also, it allowed me to be playful in a way that I felt like I'm not as much at the more formal settings in the United Church, so I was able to engage my colleagues in a more playful way, either through just simple conversation, but also through engaging our creativity in a different way through the arts. I found Greenbelt was really centered around expressing ourselves creatively, and whether that was through, sculpting or her hands-on things like puppetry, to the incredible art exhibits that were there, and also music that was lifted up through concerts, but also through collective and joint singing. So that was something that was really a highlight, and it deepened my faith in a way and allowed myself to feel more open to sharing creatively. And probably one of my favorite days was the day that I decided not to plan anything ahead, and I just sort of stumbled across a really incredible folk artist named Martin Joseph, and he was doing a session on, your guitar is your therapist. So lifting up the ways in which we express ourselves in our stories and how we're creative. And he talked a lot about, in order to be creative, to push yourself outside of the walls that surround you. And I felt like the Greenbelt experience was the beginning of that. And also, he lifted up, allow yourself to not get too tied up on the things that don't work out, but to keep trying to express yourself. And he also said, when you're expressing yourself in your story and sharing your story, to not just add to the noise. I think sometimes we speak more out of a place of well thought through things instead of from a place of our heart. And I've been carrying that around with me, coming back really longing to not just contribute to the noise that I feel is all around us. And so that has helped me to sort of deepen my faith, and also encouraged me to express myself creatively. And so those are some of the highlights for me in my time there. And yeah, look forward to your questions as well. So I'll invite Gary now.
Thank you, Sarah, and Barry and Mitchell. It's really, really good to be here. Greenbelt was a real highlight for me. They say that every moderator is allowed one somewhat offbeat idea, a crazy project, and I guess this was mine, so I'm hoping maybe to squeeze in another one. But it had an incredible excitement to bring over 100 of our leaders from across the country. I think one of the highlights for me was the fact that you arrived and you saw 20,000 people, and you realized that the struggle we're engaged in the United Church and the experiment is not just an isolated experiment. I had a sense that we were, in fact, part of a movement, and that people in Britain and from the States, from all over the world, and right across the divides, as Barry said, conservative, liberal, young, old, theological, worship-centered, we were all there together, and not only from church, but also combining with arts communities and justice-centered communities. It was a coming together, I don't know whether you call it Greenbelt, emergent, progressive, change the world through spirituality and transformation. And I got energy, but not just a personal energy, that was true, and not just energy for the 100 leaders, but a sense there is a wave that's moving through in a transformation. A philosophical, or let's call it the age of the Spirit, and I wouldn't want that immediately to be transformed into Pentecostal theology, but that there's an energy that is moving us in many different ways. One of the other highlights or learning for me was to watch out of Greenbelt, rooted in past in fresh expressions or emergent church, 3 different models or emphases in transformation. One of those was to say all communities of faith, whatever their position, need to focus on liturgical renewal, worship that touches the heart, whether that be rock music, goth music, U2, silence, Keze, Celtic, dancing. It needs to be emotional. Secondly, the communities need to be rooted into the larger community. They need to be justice-centered, missional, contextual, engaged beyond themselves. And then thirdly, they need to focus on particular practices whether you would go all the way to a neo-monastic community, or there'd be an informal commitment for prayer or honoring the Sabbath, a daily lifestyle, almost as if we are acting our way into new ways of thinking rather than the reverse of thinking our way into new ways of acting. And at best, those three things come together, and you have worship for the heart, you have engagement with community, and you have a way of living Monday to Saturday as well as on Sunday, but really is authentic, as you said, Barry, and engaged and energizing. So it was a hallelujah moment for me. So, questions?
Well, thank you all. I think it's clear to see the excitement that you all bring from your experience at Greenbelt. Do want to highlight if there are others with us who have been to Greenbelt as well. I see that Brenda Curtis has a green check mark beside her name. We would love to know from our audience who was actually with us in 2013. So you can put the green check mark beside your name by looking at the top of your screen. You'll see a figure with a raised hand. If you select the arrow to the right of that figure, drop-down menu appears and select the green check mark. That's very helpful. So now we will enter a time of questions for our four presenters and for them to interact back and forth around what was most impactful for them. We do have one question by Brenda, and she did raise this when Barry was speaking, so perhaps she wants to respond to it first. If not, others are free to jump in. But the question is, do you think we have events, gatherings similar to Greenbelt that we can build on?
Brenda, thanks for the question. I'm also going to defer to others to jump in because I live in a small geographical location and we're spread out across the country. My quick answer to your question is no. But that's only based on my experience. I mean, I've had some wonderful experiences, events I've attended in the United Church, but there really is nothing, for me anyways, that captures the experience that I had there. And I think some things are unfolding, and I think some of those are coming about because of those of us who attended there. There may be some other things going on I'm just not aware of. So, but there's a spirit that we've captured and we're bringing back with us and wanting to raise the bar of how we bring this about in surrounding communities. So I'm going to refer back to others and see what they have to say.
I'm going to jump in at this point and almost ask to defer the question a little bit, because on the next question that Josephine's going to ask, that's precisely, Brenda, what I want to focus on. But let me just highlight my own personal experience of folk music festivals. In Vancouver we have one, and it's down at Jericho Beach. And what I dream of for the church is something like we have a flavor of in the folk music movement. And I know there's one in Edmonton and in Winnipeg and in Guelph, where cross-sections of people come. Music is the energizer, but there's an intentional connection to justice groups as well, so that it catches the arts, and it catches justice, and it catches the progressive wing, not just of church, but of society. And I hate the jargon word progressive, but there's an energy where people look forward to the folk music festival. I mean, in my younger days, I would, if it were raining, it's Vancouver, I'd put on 5 garbage bags and just go and still have fun at the festival. There's something for us to learn there. One of the things we were told over and over is don't ever just try to make it churchy. You need the partnership with the non-church people who bring authenticity, honesty, and an engagement that is different and challenging, and they're surprised at the possibility of partnership. So wherever the arts communities are gathering, or the justice NGO types, green movements, Occupy Now movements, they're natural allies for us.
Absolutely.
Well, we can certainly feel the energy and look forward in our second section to hearing about some of the things that are coming out of the Greenbelt experience. I'm wondering, one of the questions that I had, and others are certainly invited to type theirs into the chat pod, is, granted that we aren't able to hear from all 100 or more participants from the United Church that attended Greenbelt last summer, do the four of you think, and maybe I can pose this to Mitchell or Sarah, do you think that your experience is representative of what others experienced? Perhaps Brenda or Lauren or Annika can type into the chat pod as well. Did others who attended Greenbelt come away with similar motifs of energy, of renewed playfulness and creativity and worship? How representative was your experience, and what might others have experienced?
The sorts of experiences that people had. And it's important to remember that Greenbelt, there'd be 4 or 5 things going on at one time. Everyone would have an entirely different experience, but would all be one experience of what Greenbelt was. But that those conversations about what the church is moving towards and about how different kinds of people are finding ways to follow Jesus in ways that are contextually authentic and meaningful and life-changing. I think that we all had different kinds of experiences, but they all spoke to that one experience. But I'd love to hear what other folks who were there
I was actually going to say that as well, Mitchell, about how you could have, each person's day could look so different because at any given time there were so many different things to choose from. But that there was sort of like a collective voice or experience even amidst that diversity. And I think that that's probably a pretty good representation of what we long for church to be like, that there's lots of different points of entry, but there's still a collective voice and some kind of collective experience, even if it looks, vast. So, that's probably at the similar sort of note of diversity of experience, but leaving with a similar feeling, maybe. Yeah, absolutely. And I think,
so Sarah, would you say that there was something there for everyone,
churches, often in ministry,
regardless of
greeted
age,
by a lot of
demographic
people,
category?
a lot of lay people
There was a
from
way that
different
people
churches
could connect with
within,
the experience
I guess,
of
the
Greenbelt.
UK. And so that was a really interesting experience. Like, are we the right people to be here? Like, should there have been full families? Because there's such a diversity of ways that you could connect from, like, the tiny children. Like, I wanted to go to a lot of the kids' events because they were awesome, to, grandmothers or great-grandmothers, great-grandfathers that were there with their families. So, yeah, there's a lots of different points of connection. So, yeah.
Just as an aside, following up of whether ministry leaders were the right people, I had actually dreamed in this original pilgrimage of having the 2 cohorts, over 40, under 40, but we'd also dreamed of having groups of 5 lay people from 10 or 20 congregations that would go. Hillhurst United in Calgary was quite excited about that model, and then we decided that apples and oranges, and it was too complex for the first pilgrimage. But dreaming of sending teams of people who would then be able to make a connection congregationally, and it would be ordered or DLMs plus lay people who hold the responsibility for worship, for education, for the life of the faith community. Just as an aside, I'll add that there's a minister, Kelly McComb, from the Waterloo area, who's going this June to the Wild Goose Festival, and she's taking 5 members of her congregation. So that's a little more local expression, an American offshoot of the Greenbelt movement, very similar in ethos. And there's going to be a whole congregational team going. A really interesting experiment. And I'll be intrigued to find out how it develops.
Well, it seems that the experiences you've shared are echoed by many, even here on the webinar today. Miriam, Annika, Brenda have all shared very similar life-changing impact that Greenbelt had on their faith and ministry. So thank you, folks, for your comments. I am going to move us towards the second question, which is looking more towards the future and the impact of Greenbelt both for your ministry and your personal life. So the question is around what difference did it make? What changed in your ministry as a result, or what changed in your thinking
Josephine and Brenda,
about
this
ministry?
is an opportunity for me to
provide
respond
some
in a
reflection
little more detail to your
that.
question.
And we will
in terms
hear
of my
from
ministry,
Gary,
at
then
this moment
Sarah,
as moderator,
Barry,
it gives me
and
dreams
Mitchell.
of what we might do in terms of creating Greenbelt-like experiences and possibilities here in Canada for the community, for the authenticity, for the relationship that we've all mentioned being so important. I just want to reflect, as Barry said, for many people, this Greenbelt was their church. And there's been conversations about church becoming a festival model. That is, that the festival becomes the hub, and you have one or two experiences in a year, and then you have the spokes, which are smaller little groups of community. We call them communities of faith, say, rather than congregations. And then they will gather for their annual shot in the arm and their connection with other people and different trends and what have you. Actually, here in Vancouver, we've just finished this past week, on Saturday, a one-day Greenbelt event with incredibly creative worship, with spiritual practices, and a dozen workshops. I know that in, well, I'm not sure if I'm on at this point.
Sure.
Yes? Am I still on? In Tatamagouche in the Maritimes, in August, they're having a two-day event. They're calling it the Festamagouche. And they're combining justice and music and faith. And they're actually having a total interfaith service on the 24th with Christian groups, Aboriginal groups, and Buddhist groups. Ottawa, in November, is developing a two-day event that's focusing on arts and faith. Peterborough is doing something very similar as well. So we're getting this flavor of small one-day or two-day events right across the country, which I'm hoping will give people a flavor of what it might be like. I think there's energy for and possibilities of a Canadian Greenbelt. Mind you, our geography suggests that we might need to do it in 2 or 3 locations and try to keep it more contextual, regional, and local, and affordable. That's one possibility. The other, and this is just another crazy moderator dream, we do so many different events like Worship Matters, Turning the Tables, Behold, Rendezvous, more franchises, and they're almost silo events. Like if you like to brush up on worship, go to the one. If you really want to deal with intercultural, go to Behold. I have a dream that we, once every 3 years, do one huge United Church event, and they all happen at the same time in some central place, so that the justice folk rub shoulders with the worship people, with the youth people, with the music people. And although that's denominational, I could imagine 500 of us, of all shapes and sizes, coming together and having this incredible event. And it's the cross-seeding, the cross-pollination that would, I think, accentuate the possibilities for Greenbelt, for transformation. And who knows? We're actually thinking of having an evangelism event next spring, which is a little weird for the United Church. But I'd like to see if it becomes actually an umbrella for something that's more Greenbelt. Not just evangelism in an old-fashioned way, but art and justice, as well as preaching and worship and contemplation. So we'll see.
Great. Didn't know if you were catching your breath or you were good. So.
I'm trying to keep to my 3 minutes. You know me.
I'm impressed. Yeah, so some of the ways that I think Greenbelt sort of impacted for my ministry and my faith and my life coming back was that it sort of helped to affirm some of the things that were already happening for me. And I think we continue to be courageous and bold to sort of step outside of what we've known or what is traditional, and that sometimes feels really hard, but at Greenbelt it felt like it wasn't as hard, and that to continue and encouragement for that. So I kind of came back. My partner and I have a host church in our living room once a month where we do arts expression. We have communion together. We have some informal space and some formal space. And Greenbelt was sort of an affirmation to keep with that. I think we were kind of reflecting on whether or not that should continue before we both went to Greenbelt. But when we returned, we felt like that was a space that we should continue for sure. And so that continues to meet and has like a Greenbelt type flavor, especially since coming back. The other thing that Greenbelt did was that because a group of colleagues sort of came together and had this sort of incredible experience, some from the more southern Ontario area have continued to meet regularly to plan a colleague sort of support and their family support weekend on Labor Day weekend. So that will be held at Five Oaks, and so that's another opportunity to sort of engage. We'd have lots of art expression, but also a time just to like talk about what it's like to be in ministry as a young person and the joys and challenges of that, and also the ways in which we're kind of looking to a more progressive, sort of outside maybe the traditional church type of ministry. And so that's another really exciting thing, and so looking forward to that. I mean, the other good, amazing thing about that experience is that the group that's been meeting is quite diverse, and also it allows like us to have many moments of Greenbelt even in our planning for that. So that's been a real joy and a blessing. Yeah, it's also encouraged me to continue to find ways of just trying things and seeing where they end up, you know. And I think Greenbelt encourages people to try things, and then even if they don't work out the way that we had intended, to see what's left and what's still there. And so that's been encouraging for me as well. Yeah, I think that's good for now. I'll hand it over.
Great, Sarah. Wow. Both you and Jerry said so much, I don't even know if I want to say what I had to say, but I'll get to something that each of you said here. You know, I'm not certain it made a difference more than what it did is confirm for me what I believe about the direction that we have to take as a church, the United Church, in every single area of our life. The passion and the commitment for something new, embracing that old, ancient, contemplative container of Christian practices is what we carry with us in the rhythms of our daily living, and it informs us with the message of the Christ. But I personally am as keen as ever to push out and push the margins of how we can live and breathe as a faith community and make the radical changes where space is created for the Spirit of the Holy One to get in. And that's what Gary and Sarah were touching on, I think, when they speak about the Greenbelt experiences, is it's the Spirit that was there in the center of all of this. And you can define that Spirit however you want to, but that was the thing that was leveraging everything that happened for anyone and everyone who attended that event. What I find most challenging, though, still, for myself, who's one in ministry, is that congregations, at least some of them that I know, and I'm not being critical, I'm just naming the struggle, say they want to move in new directions, but quite often they really don't. And there's a lot of pushback that comes from all corners. We go off to these great events as leaders. We come back full of energy and excitement to imagine something, to breathe something and live something out in new ways. And often what happens is we get told, not yet, maybe in the future, some other time. And I get that people are fearful. I'm fearful. But my fear gets embraced by the Spirit of the Holy One always to push me forward. And my guess is we, as a church, do not have time to wait around. God's not asking us to wait around. God's Spirit is pushing and calling us to trust and to become something new while holding on to the core message of the Jesus, which is what we all need. I am aware of one new congregation, at least in the presbytery that I'm in. They've become known as a bit of a breakaway group called Faith United, who gather in a rented space. That's not so odd each week. They'll probably never get locked into purchasing a building or building something. Their focus is primarily on social justice outreach. And here's the big, and they believe the big thing is that at no time are they imagining that they will ever call an order of ministry person. And each week for them is incredibly different when you go to experience worship in their place. So they gather throughout the week to do study and learning in home groups and learning with each other. And even the presbytery has been challenged to know what to do with them, which I kind of celebrate and have a laugh about, but that's the great struggle. So, you know, when Gary said Festival of Faith Hub, or a festival hub, and then my final comment on this is that the people are living on the ground, at least a lot of the lay people I encountered, they're actually living on the ground with their feet, whatever their faith is. And that is provocative, I think, in so many ways. So that's where I'm at, and I'm still passionate about it in millions of ways, but I'm going to turn it over to Mitchell.
Thank you. One of the things that I'm wrestling with is the dichotomy of safety and of risk. And I think that often we talk about churches as being safe places for people, places of welcome, places of comfort. And a lot of the language we use is that sort of, like the church is like a nice, comfortable quilt that your grandmother made you and that you can wrap yourself in. But I think that one of the things that I took from Greenbelt was that there is a need for more risk in our faith life. That following Jesus can be dangerous, and that we need to embrace and accept some of that risk, and that we as a structure, as an institution, need to be more willing to take on the kinds of risks of starting new things and being willing to know that if we start a dozen things, probably 11 will fail, and maybe one of them will become, in 40 years, a 20,000-person festival that will be transformative and life-changing for so many people. But that currently, I think that we're still in this mode of, we're on year 52 or 53 of our decline, and I still think it's sunk into us that things are changing, things have changed, and that we haven't yet adapted to new realities in terms of being willing to be daring and bold and accept that a lot of what we're going to try to do to deal with the challenges facing us are going to fail, and that's fine. And because it's hard for us to know in little communities here or there where the Spirit is trying to lead us, and so we have to respond as best as we can to the Spirit's nudgings, and sometimes the Spirit's pushing us off the cliff. But to respond to those and to see what does end up working, and to see what is in accord with God's will, and to just be willing to follow Jesus in pursuit of the mission of God in all the ways that might be. Some of which will be risky. Some of what we'll do will fail. And for me personally, I'm really excited. If we talk about our currently existing communities of faith as being risk averse, as being change averse, then maybe what we need to do is to try starting new ones that aren't connected with the old ones, and let them both go forward and see where they go. And many of our existing communities of faith will continue to be beautiful places where people will encounter the risen Christ, and maybe some of our new ones can be too. And I think that it's that being willing to do new things, and being willing to acknowledge that most of what we will do will fail, and that's perfectly okay. That we're willing to take on those kinds of risks, because that's what it will need for us to do to follow Jesus.
Well, I so appreciate your comments, and I want to pick up on the whole conversation about risk and safety, and Mitchell, as you alluded to, I think the statistic is something around for every success there were 10 failures behind it. Ask anybody who's ever successfully invented or starting anything. So certainly we do need courage in our congregations to face the uncertainty of the future. We do recognize, however, that that is challenging and that fear does exist. And what I'm wondering is whether Greenbelt offered any resources for addressing some of those challenges.
That
Was
there definitely
there
were, and just to
anything
pick up,
offered
a little
in
phrase
terms of
that says
walking
that we
through
have invested so much
how
energy as a
to
church
share
in
the
getting to the
experience of
point where
Greenbelt, how to begin those transformative congregations within the
we're
conversations
fail-safe,
within our
and
local
what we actually need
context?
now are some safe sales, just to reverse the order and do that risk. I think you saw not only energy at Greenbelt, but there were lots of examples. I was impressed by the fact that there were big names like a Barbara Brown Taylor, Jim Wallace, Pete Rollins, what have you, but there were all kinds of small little community groups, primarily lay-directed and energized, who presented small models of community of faith. One that caught my attention was called Sinai in the Desert, which was an attempt in London to have a semi-monastic, that's the wrong term actually, but people who were couples, families, young, old, living all over the city who still made a commitment to live differently. So I think if you go to the Greenbelt website, they have all kinds of taped resorts, videos, what have you. You'll start to see some models and examples of, and particularly around the liturgical renewal or the mission centers or the practice. And I think there's something concrete. You'll notice, and in my last comment, in the comprehensive review, we've talked about communities of faith rather than congregations, saying all congregations are communities of faith, but not all communities of faith will necessarily be congregations. Because you immediately think of a congregation, a building, a board, an ordained, ordered, commissioned, diaconal. Not necessarily so.
Story that I can't remember who it said, but we were talking about the last new church that was built that was founded, that was created in their conference or presbytery. And they said, yeah, it already has a leaky roof. And it took me 10 seconds to figure out that they meant a building. Because I was like, what do you mean people are leaky? Like, I thought it was some sort of bizarre metaphor about the people were leaky. But no, they were like, when this person was talking about church, they were talking about a building. When I heard church, I heard people. And I think that that's a shift that we need to make.
Can I add one more comment to that? This is a plug for Edge. They just hired a new person, Chris Polinagarn, whose responsibility is to build people together and explore fresh expressions, which is one of those in terms, but it means here are some experiments, here are some possible safe sales. The one we know best around the country is Messy Church, but there are all other kinds of them, and he's doing some work with the Fresh Expressions staff person in Canada and has a cohort with 20 people now working away on it. If that interests you, get in touch with Wedge. With Wedge Issues.
Hey, Gary,
My political
in case you don't know, Gary, I'm one of those 20 people. I wonder why.
Oh, brilliant. Chris told me that, in fact, the majority of the first 15 were all people who'd gone to Greenbelt, who'd caught
I just want to, Josephine, I want to echo what Gary said about the communities of faith experience over there. I mean, it was the new monastics that I really learned a great deal from over there about the new models of community they're forming. And those are launching, they've been in the United States for a while, but there's a number of those new monastic communities that are already launched across Canada in different places. And they're all about being a community of faith in some radically different ways, but living their faith on a 7-day-a-week basis, the way that they ground themselves and how they connect with the population that they're centered with.
One more thing.
I just wanted to lift up that I think a lot in
I think, Sarah, you had a comment.
we measure success based on the amount of people and the amount of time that something's been going, and how much time people invest in it.
And I know that Gary has one more comment, so Gary, I'll let you make your comment, and then we'll turn to Brenda's question.
Not necessarily measuring success on that, more on meaningful connections, more on feeling challenged, and more on sharing stories and feeling God's presence within that. So I think like there needs to be like a shift like a reorienting on how we measure success, and like what succeeds might not look the same as what we used to measure it by. And so I looked that up. And I also live in an intentional community and would love to share resources about that sometime. So I think it's a really good model of connecting more deeply with our neighbors. So anyway, thanks.
That's brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a congregation in Georgetown, Ontario that also has sponsored a intentional community, which I did read about in this month's Observer or last month. So for those who get the Observer, you might have noted that. I do.
It's not
go ahead, Gary, and
monastic,
then we'll
but
get back to Brenda's
the blend between intentional community and something more serious. So it's exciting. It is popping up.
Mm-hmm. And Brenda's question is related. She's wondering about making a list of allies or other groups that we could meet with. Could we become intentional about meeting with them to see what they think might work in terms of something like Greenbelt? And then she also offers adding on to Rendezvous. So I think that was probably part of the same thought, making it a youth event, expanding it into a national event. So how do we partner with some of these other things that are going on? And if I can just add to that, Press Express and
Brenda, what I can tell you is one of the first things I said to Gary over at Greenbelt after the first day
out of Greenbelt, what
Gary,
are some of those connections?
you're
what
in
are
trouble
allies, potential
because you
allies?
carried
How
100
we go
people
about
with you
connecting
to
with
an
them?
event,
What are your thoughts?
and we're going to come back to Canada and stir the pot like no other. And so it's Gary's fault, of course, but that's why we pay him the big bucks, isn't it? But absolutely, there are people who are interested in doing this. Rob Dalgleish, who heads up EDGE, is quite well aware of some of us. Gary's alluded to some of the ideas that have been brewing. And so my passion is to provide some leadership around that in all the ways that I can in the area that we're living in the GTA, or even the wider area. So there are a number of us people who are really keen to do something.
Maybe I can jump in because, interestingly enough, as we were there on our pilgrimage, the Canadian Mennonite Church, which is primarily based in Ontario with offices in Winnipeg, they were there on a pilgrimage, and there were 15 Mennonites with some of their leaders and staff. So their General Secretary, Willard Mesker, is really keen on doing an ecumenical connection. So conversations have been happening, and Gareth Higgins, who is the former director of the Wild Goose Festival in the States, has offered to come up and give 2 or 3 days of free organizing, information, sharing of wisdom, and then is available for pushing it along further. We're getting close to it's almost like we need someone who said, I'll champion it, I'm going to run with it. Because I think EDGE is ready to be supportive, but is feeling they need to be careful about energy commitments. And I'm feeling that with myself, like I want to run with it, but just can't quite find enough time to do the organizing. But I have a sense that there are a lot of individuals out there just ready to, say, bring it together. So somebody else, jump in here.
Well, I'm certainly prepared, Gary, so I guess it may end up being me. Who knows? We'll see.
Well, okay. Yeah.
I'm committed.
Yeah. Well, and I was just with somebody over the Holy Week holiday and preaching in Good Friday, and there's somebody who comes from the arts community who was organizing. She said, count me in as well. So there are a number of voices that I'm hearing across the country of count me in, but I need somebody to start organizing it. So it's somebody needing to pull it together. And just to go back to Brenda's comment about Rendezvous, we did look at trying to turn that into a Greenbelt event, But one of the hard things in the Canadian context, or maybe it's United Church culture, we planned so far ahead that it was fairly well organized before we came back. But that's part of what I meant by a big tent United Church gathering that would be rendezvous plus fresh expressions, worship matters, behold, justice, turning the tables, so that we all come together and share the resources, rather than having 8 small, not as well attended as possible, siloed United Church events, but one big one. And I think that would be a blast.
I think
really
that would be great. Oh, sorry. Okay, I think that would be great too, just to echo what you said, Gary, because then there could be the same sort of diversity of ways of engaging, like there was at Greenbelt, and I think sometimes we just go to specialize or like look just at one thing, and how great it would be for us to have a lot more crossover, I think is what being an intercultural church is about. So lifting that up, and I like have done some work with youth, and I think that what's often good for youth is actually what's good for everyone. But we somehow I find that often youth in my context are the ones that are bold enough to try it, and so how can we continue to learn from youth and through the rendezvous experience? So yeah, I think it would be a great support. So.
Well, I am going to give each of our presenters one chance to say something that maybe they weren't able to say earlier, or anything that has emerged throughout this conversation. But before I do that, as we've been discussing, I just wanted to put in a few plugs. One is the Wild Goose Festival that is happening in North Carolina from June 26th to 29th, so coming up very quickly. And you'll find the link to that on the top right of your screen. Unfortunately, it's not hyperlinked, so you will need to copy and paste it. And just below that is the Greenbelt that's happening this August. And as mentioned, Chris from EDGE is attending and invites anyone who would like to join that pilgrimage. I believe there are a number of people already going with Chris, Barry, who will be signed up for that in August. So do contact him. And the Wild Goose Festival, Gary, I believe you mentioned that Kelly McComb in Waterloo is bringing some members of the congregation to that event. So do feel free to check out those websites. Also, the email addresses for each of our presenters below if you have a follow-up question, if you want to talk about where to go from here, the types of things Greenbelt might do or share in your congregation or contact.
Well, it's real easy for me, everybody. So just here.
So now I will turn things back over, and I think what we'll do is we will start with Barry, then Mitchell, Sarah. Gary kind of do a backwards Z. And if you have a final thought, reflection,
if I could go this summer, I would.
Go
to Greenbelt, and my sense is the more of you who go to Greenbelt and have the experience, you will return changed forever. You will never be able to do church the way you've ever done church before. It will transform you. And so, please go.
That's
all
great,
for
thank
me.
you, Barry. I think that we've had a really rich conversation today, and I think that it's continuing a conversation that we've been having for a while. And I think I said earlier that we're on year 53 or whatever of our decline. But I think that what we need to remember, and that Sarah really lifted up, is that maybe we're measuring the wrong things, and maybe that there are new and exciting things that are emerging that we can support, and that actually what we're seeing is a wave of renewal in our church that is beginning in little shoots here and there that we need to nurture and support, and to dare to try some new things, and that as we do that, then we can continue to live faithfully following Jesus wherever that might take us. So, Sarah.
So like I said, there's this group that's gathering to plan the Five Oaks gathering of my colleagues and their families, and we calling ourselves Living the Dream. Living the Dream Baby actually is the name of the group that's gathering, and that emerged out of Greenbelt. And I think my blessing to you is that in your different places in the country that you're living the dream, and I think Greenbelt's really encouraged to dream big and to live into those dreams. And so I just offer that as a closing. How are the ways that we are living into the things that we're dreaming of for our church, for our communities, and for our country, and for our world? So thank you.
I would just partly say amen to the words of my three colleagues. It just feels like there's this wave of excitement and possibility, and I really do think the church, our denomination, other expressions of church, we're being transformed by the movement of spirit, whether we like it or not. I would say to people, get to Greenbelt if you can. Not possible for everybody. Look for allies. The spiritual but not religious, the 29 to 30% of our population, according to the last census, they share the questions, they share so much of the passion, and they're there. So in your community, who's out there that you can connect with and do something larger than just the church itself?
And I offer a final word of thank you to each of our presenters for sharing the hope and the excitement that has come for you as a result of being together at Greenbelt. And also thank you to our participants for your questions, for your encouragement, and for being part of this webinar today. We hope that although we couldn't cover everything in an hour, you did get a taste of the energy that was there, and for those who haven't yet experienced Greenbelt, that you will have an opportunity to connect either with the upcoming Wild Goose Festival, Greenbelt, or any number of the offshoot programs that have been mentioned. So as a reminder, we do have some feedback that we would invite you to fill out, questions around would you consider being involved in a Greenbelt in Canada if one was being planned, and would you be able to perhaps help out with that? So the questions just take 2 or 3 minutes. They're short answer polls, and they will be visible to all of us. There's also a space for your comments around today's webinar and your experience, so keep in mind that the 5 of us will be reviewing your feedback, but it is submitted anonymously, so we don't actually see who belongs to the comment that was made. Once you've selected the box that you'd like to select for your